You're listening to the Vocabbett podcast, where I help students improve their vocabulary for the SAT, ACT, and life itself using my unique and research-backed story-based method. On this podcast, I'm sharing the best tips and tricks for a more enriched vocabulary and pain-free test day. Hello, and welcome to episode 65 of the Vocabbett podcast. I'm Erica Abbott, a former English and history teacher, the author of the young adult novel Ahead of Her Time, and the founder of the eponymously named vocabulary company Vocabbett. In the last episode, we talked about how the word blatherskite made it across the pond from Scotland, and today I want to talk about the journey of the word soccer. If you've been around for a minute or two, you probably know that what we in the United States call soccer, most of the rest of the world refers to as football or something like that. Because we are in the minority in calling it soccer, and because we didn't invent the game, a lot of people just kind of think we're stupid. Everyone else calls it football, why don't we? I became interested in this when I watched The English Game on Netflix. It's a mini-series about the early days of what I'm going to call soccer because I'm American. And it's only a couple of episodes, but it's by Julian Fellowes, who made Downton Abbey, so you know it's good. And it's basically about these posh British schools who turned soccer from a kind of backyard game where everyone had their own rules into a proper standardized sport. They created a league called the Football Association with rules and a cup that they all compete for, the Football Association Cup, the FA Cup. And the guys who did this were fond of assigning nicknames to things. Evidently, they liked nicknames that ended in ER. I think of the pirate flag, the Jolly Roger. And I'm getting this next part from an article on dictionary.com, and I'll link to it in the show notes. But I guess they did this with a lot of stuff. Breakfast was brecca. And association football, for the fancy league that they invented, remember the Football Association, became soccer. If you think of the spelling of association, ASSOC, that's where they get the sock for soccer. And there are written references to soccer dating all the way back to 1885. So this is their word. The guys who turned football into a sport, and the guys who came right after them, they're the ones who created the name soccer. So how did it get to us, and where does our football come in? Among these fancy British schools, there was one that thought the game was better if you could move the ball with your hands and your feet. They were also a lot rougher in how they played. This was rugby school, so while everyone else was playing association football, they played rugby football. By the time these games reached the United States, they're obviously very different games, and they kind of warrant two different names. If you think about rugby versus soccer, it doesn't really make sense to call them the same thing. So the people who played the original fancy British school soccer distinguished their game by keeping their nickname. They play association football. They play soccer. Rugby football, on the other hand, was quickly picked up by our elite schools, the Harvards and the Yales and the like. And they basically did what the fancy British schools had done just a little earlier. For a while, each school had their own rules, but eventually it became standardized and known by a shorter nickname. Rugby football became football, just like association football became soccer. So in a weird way, the word soccer isn't stupid. It's just the nickname the old-timey Brits used to refer to their game, association football. And the name stuck as a rougher form of football grew in popularity alongside it, rugby football, where you could use your hands and your feet. It just was a way to distinguish the two sports. I think the reason that soccer faded in the UK, where it actually originated, is because rugby football and its offspring, what we call regular football, didn't become as big of a deal over there. If slang and nicknames don't become an official part of the language really quickly, they fade because everyone thinks their parents are lame. So we kept soccer because it became a way to distinguish the two sports. But over there, they didn't really need to distinguish it against anything. So it's a nickname, whatever. It's easier just to shorten association football to football. And also it has the benefit of not being what your parents called it. This is something that I've always been curious about. Like, did we just make soccer up? Is this some cowboy American thing? But actually, it's the old-timey Brits who invented this word, and it's stuck here whereas it faded over there because words, just like everything else, adapt and react to their environment. The name grew stronger in the United States in response to another popular football, but since there wasn't another football that was quite as big a deal over in the UK, the nickname just kind of faded over there. All right, short and sweet today, answering a question we've all been curious about for a long time. Definitely check out The English Game on Netflix if you need a new show to watch, and I will see you guys next week.